He was just another waiter, quiet, overlooked, and judged for the color of his skin. Day after day, he served tables where whispers and stares reminded him he didn't belong. But one ordinary shift turned into something no one expected. A customer tried to belittle him, not knowing the truth about who this man really was. And when the billionaire sitting nearby witnessed what unfolded, the entire room went silent. What happened next wasn't just surprising, it revealed a truth about dignity, prejudice, and power that cannot be ignored. The restaurant was nothing special, just a place where the wealthy stopped in for late dinners, where laughter echoed off polished floors, and where the staff blended into the background. Among them was a young black waiter, quiet and steady, moving from table to table with practiced steps. To most, he was invisible. A man serving drinks, clearing plates, forgotten the moment he walked away. But behind his calm eyes was a story no one ever asked about. He carried himself with dignity, though every day was a reminder that the world didn't always see him as equal. The whispers, the impatient sighs, the way some customers looked right through him, as if his presence was a burden. Still, he worked, because work was survival. This was his normal life, unnoticed, undervalued, yet filled with a strength that few could see. He knew that respect wasn't freely given, it had to be earned, fought for, sometimes in silence. And on one seemingly ordinary night, as the dining room filled with the hum of conversations and clinking glasses, something would happen that shattered this routine. A moment of arrogance from a customer. A flash of hidden talent no one expected. And the chain of events that followed would leave the entire restaurant stunned. The night had begun like any other. Orders rushed in, glasses clinked, and laughter filled the air. The wealthy patrons in the dining room carried on with their comfortable lives, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing in the heart of the man serving them. For him, every shift was a test of patience, of enduring the subtle cuts of prejudice that never truly healed. At first, it was the little things. A wave of the hand instead of a polite request. A deliberate pause before tipping, as if his skin color made him less worthy of recognition. But that night, a table in the corner would turn these small humiliations into something sharper. A group sat there, loud and confident, dressed in suits that screamed power. Among them was a man whose arrogance filled the room more than his voice. From the moment the waiter approached, the man's eyes narrowed, studying him not as a human being, but as something beneath him. The order was simple, but the tone wasn't. He spoke slowly, mockingly, as though the waiter couldn't possibly understand. Each word was drawn out, dripping with condescension. Others at the table smirked, watching the exchange like entertainment. The waiter wrote it down carefully, refusing to let his expression betray the sting of humiliation. He had lived through worse. He had learned how to keep moving, to swallow the bitterness. But this was different. As he walked away, whispers trailed behind him, laughter disguised as casual conversation. He heard the words, not all of them, but enough. Does he even understand? Bet he barely finished school. Each syllable pressed against him like a weight, heavy and suffocating. Yet he kept working. He delivered plates, refilled glasses, cleared tables. But that corner table wasn't finished. Their laughter grew bolder, their eyes followed him across the room, waiting for the next chance to remind him he didn't belong. And when the moment came, it cut deeper than before. The arrogant man called him back, this time speaking in German. His words were sharp, meant to confuse, meant to humiliate in front of his peers. It was a performance, a game of power. The table erupted in chuckles, delighted at the spectacle of watching a man struggle under the weight of language and pride. To them, it was harmless fun. To the waiter, it was something far more cruel. Because in that instant, the room didn't just see a waiter. They saw a stereotype. They saw someone who, in their eyes, couldn't possibly rise above the role they had assigned him. He stood there, still, the tray in his hands trembling just enough to betray the storm within. And then, slowly, he responded. Not in broken words. Not in hesitation. But in flawless German. The same language thrown at him like a weapon now rolled off his tongue with confidence, precision, and grace. The laughter stopped. Forks froze midair. The table that had moments ago been roaring with mockery fell into silence. And in that silence, the balance of power shifted. But silence can be dangerous. Because silence hides more than shock, it hides shame, anger, disbelief. The man at the table narrowed his eyes, his pride cracked by the truth that this waiter was more than he appeared. He tried to regain control, to laugh it off, but the tension was already rising. Others in the room had noticed. Other diners, wealthy and privileged, turned their heads to see what had silenced the arrogant laughter. And when they realized what had happened, the energy in the room shifted entirely. For the waiter, it should have been a moment of triumph. A quiet act of resistance, of dignity. But in a world built on prejudice, dignity often comes at a cost. The man who had mocked him wasn't done. His pride demanded a response, a way to reassert control. He leaned back in his chair, smirk twisting into something crueler, and muttered something under his breath. The words were faint, but the intent was clear. Racism rarely hides for long. It reveals itself in moments of exposure, when arrogance is challenged. The waiter felt it, the hostility, the shift in the air. His chest tightened, not out of fear, but out of familiarity. He knew this dance. He had lived it in different forms, on different days. Prejudice dressed up as jokes, as casual remarks, as subtle exclusions. But this was louder, public, undeniable. And then, something unexpected happened. Across the room, a man had been watching. He wasn't dressed like the others. His suit was simple, his demeanor calm, almost quiet. But his presence carried weight. People glanced at him with a mixture of respect and caution, though no one dared to approach. He had power, the kind that didn't need to be spoken. And he had seen everything. Every insult. Every smirk. Every calculated attempt to diminish a man simply trying to do his job. He didn't move at first. He simply watched, eyes fixed on the table in the corner, on the waiter standing tall despite the humiliation. But the moment the waiter spoke German, fluid, perfect, undeniable, something changed. The billionaire, for that's what he was, leaned forward ever so slightly, his attention locked on the unfolding scene. The arrogant man at the table noticed, too. His laughter faltered, his smirk faded, replaced by the uneasy awareness that he was no longer in control of the room. The waiter wasn't the only one who had risen above his attempted mockery. Now, someone far more powerful was watching, and judging. The tension in the air grew heavier with each passing second. The waiter, standing tall, refused to shrink. The customer, simmering with wounded pride, refused to back down. And the billionaire, silent and calculating, prepared to intervene in a way that would change everything. But no one in that room, not the waiter, not the arrogant man, not the other diners, knew just how far this moment would reach. What started as a simple act of humiliation had become a stage for something greater. A clash between prejudice and dignity, arrogance and truth, power and justice. The restaurant buzzed with whispers now. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, unsure of where to place their loyalty. Others stared in awe, realizing they had just witnessed a man reveal strength in the face of cruelty. And through it all, the waiter kept moving. He didn't argue. He didn't escalate. He simply continued his work, his silent resistance louder than any words could be. But the night wasn't over. Because what the billionaire did next would not only stun the entire room, it would echo far beyond those four walls. The silence that followed the waiter's flawless German hung like a storm cloud over the restaurant. What should have been a moment of quiet dignity now became something darker. The arrogant man's smirk had vanished, but the wound to his pride only fueled his anger. His face flushed, not with embarrassment, but with the kind of rage that comes from being exposed. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing into slits, and began to mutter, not caring that his words carried across the table. The venom dripped easily, racial slurs masked in the disguise of jokes, crude remarks meant to reduce the waiter back to the role he had so effortlessly risen above. It was no longer just arrogance. It was hostility. The waiter felt the weight of every word, but he did not break. He had learned long ago that to respond with anger would only feed the prejudice. So he stood, his tray balanced in steady hands, his back straight. But inside, the storm raged. His chest tightened. His throat burned. He wanted to shout, to tell them who he was, what he had achieved, what he had endured. But silence was the only weapon he had left. The table laughed again, nervous, hollow laughter this time, directed not at humor but at the man's desperate attempt to claw back control. Yet even among his friends, there were shifting eyes, unease spreading like cracks in glass. They had seen too much. They knew he had gone too far. And across the room, the billionaire still watched. At first, he remained seated, observing as though weighing the moment. But his silence carried its own kind of power, and soon, others noticed. Conversations dimmed, forks rested against plates, glasses stopped midair. The attention of the room funneled into a single, fragile moment, a waiter standing tall against the cruelty of a man desperate to maintain dominance. The billionaire rose. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't slam his chair or raise his voice. But the very act of standing shifted the entire atmosphere. Whispers swept through the room. Heads turned. The arrogant man at the table faltered, his laughter stuttering into silence as he realized who was moving toward them. The billionaire walked with calm, deliberate steps. Every eye followed him. The waiter lowered his gaze, unsure of what was about to happen. Would this powerful man take the customer's side, as so many with wealth and influence often did? Or would he, too, see only a waiter and nothing more? The billionaire stopped at the table. He looked first at the arrogant man, his expression unreadable, then at the waiter, whose hands tightened on the tray though he remained steady. The pause was excruciating, the silence thick enough to suffocate. And then, without a word, the billionaire reached into his pocket. The arrogant man smirked again, misreading the gesture, believing this was an ally coming to reassure him. But the smirk died when the billionaire placed something on the table, not a wallet, not a tip, but a small, folded piece of paper. Beside it, he laid down a ticket. The room leaned in, straining to see. The arrogant man's face twisted in confusion, but the billionaire didn't look at him. Instead, he turned his gaze to the waiter, his eyes steady, filled with something the waiter had not seen in a very long time, respect. The paper was a note. The ticket was a plain pass. And though the waiter had not yet opened it, he understood. This wasn't charity. This wasn't pity. This was recognition, an acknowledgement of dignity, of worth, of potential long buried beneath the weight of prejudice. But before the meaning could fully sink in, the arrogant man erupted. His chair screeched back, his voice rose, sharp and furious. He accused the billionaire of making a spectacle, of humiliating him. And then he turned on the waiter, his words venomous, his rage unmasked. He shouted not just insults but threats, his voice echoing through the restaurant. The waiter froze. For a moment, fear gripped him. The threats weren't idle. They carried the weight of privilege, of power misused. He had seen men like this before, men who believed that money and skin color gave them the right to destroy others without consequence. The room tensed. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some lowering their eyes, unwilling to intervene. Others raised phones, discreetly recording, sensing that history was unfolding before them. The billionaire remained still, his presence alone a shield against the storm. And then the turning point came. The arrogant man reached forward, his hand sweeping toward the waiter, not in violence yet, but in a gesture sharp enough to make the room gasp. It was the moment where dignity and danger collided. The waiter's body stiffened, his instinct screaming to move, to defend, to flee. But he didn't. He stood, rooted in place, eyes locked not on the man trying to tear him down but on the billionaire who stood beside him. In that gaze, he found something he had long fought to protect, his humanity, his worth, his truth. The billionaire's voice finally broke the silence. Calm. Firm. Final. He spoke not to the waiter, not to the room, but to the arrogant man whose cruelty had poisoned the night. The words were simple, but their weight shattered the air. You've revealed who you are. The rest of us see it now. The arrogant man faltered, his face draining of color. The room erupted in whispers, phones lifted higher, the tide of public opinion turning like a wave crashing against stone. He tried to argue, to laugh it off, but the power was gone. The control had slipped from his hands, ripped away by truth laid bare for all to see. And in that moment, the waiter realized something profound. This wasn't just about him. It wasn't about a single insult, a single act of humiliation. It was about every man and woman who had ever been reduced to less than human in the eyes of prejudice. It was about every silent battle fought in kitchens, in streets, in offices, in lives unseen. Tears burned at the edges of his vision, though he refused to let them fall. He stood taller, stronger, as the billionaire placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. It was not ownership. It was solidarity. The restaurant no longer buzzed with laughter or casual conversation. It pulsed with something far greater, reckoning. The arrogant man stumbled back into his chair, suddenly small, suddenly powerless. The waiter didn't need to respond. The note and the ticket said enough. They were a promise of opportunity, a doorway to a future no amount of mockery could erase. And yet, beneath the triumph, a question lingered. Would the world outside those walls see what this room had seen tonight? Or would it, once again, turn away, pretending not to notice the ugliness that had been exposed? The billionaire's words still hung in the air, echoing louder than any outburst. You've revealed who you are. The story was not over. The waiter's journey was not complete. But this night, this moment, was the fracture point. The line drawn in silence and dignity against the weight of hatred. And what came after would determine not just his future, but the way this story lived on in every person who witnessed it. The waiter left the table that night with the note and the ticket clutched in his hand. But as he stepped away, heart pounding, he knew, the hardest part wasn't behind him. It was only beginning. The restaurant never forgot that night. Neither did the waiter. The note and ticket left behind by the billionaire weren't just pieces of paper, they were symbols of something greater. They represented recognition, dignity, and the truth that he was worth far more than the world had often allowed him to believe. But even as he left the dining room, his hands trembling with the weight of possibility, he carried something heavier, the memory of every insult, every smirk, every moment he had been reduced to less than human because of the color of his skin. That night had exposed the cruelty of prejudice in front of an entire room. Yet he knew that outside those walls, the world wasn't always so quick to watch, to intervene, to care. For the waiter, the incident became a turning point. The ticket carried him toward opportunities he had once thought impossible. The note, written in the billionaire's steady hand, became a reminder that his story mattered, that silence could be powerful, but his voice could be stronger. His life shifted, yes. But the pain of that night, the humiliation that sparked it, lingered like a scar. And that's what makes this story more than just a personal triumph. Because for every waiter who finds recognition, there are countless others who are silenced, dismissed, or destroyed by the same cycle of injustice. Racism doesn't always wear the mask of violence. Sometimes it hides in laughter, in assumptions, in the quiet way dignity is stripped away from those society refuses to see. That night forced a room full of privileged diners to witness what too many pretend not to notice. It was a mirror, reflecting the ugliness that festers when prejudice goes unchecked. And while one billionaire's note and ticket changed the course of a single life, they couldn't erase the deeper truth. Racism is not solved by one act of kindness. It demands awareness, courage, and action from all of us. Think about it. How many stories like this unfold in silence? How many moments of humiliation never get recorded, never get noticed, never get challenged? How many lives are weighed down by the invisible chains of judgment before they even have a chance to rise? The waiter's story is a reminder that dignity should not depend on luck, on who happens to be watching, or on the generosity of those with power. Dignity is a right. Respect is a right. Humanity is a right. And yet, too often, these rights are denied because of skin color, accent, background, or class. So when you hear this story, don't just see it as one man's struggle. See it as a call to open your eyes, to notice, to stand up when silence feels easier. Because prejudice thrives in silence. It dies when confronted. The waiter walked away that night with more than a note and a ticket. He walked away with proof that truth has a way of rising, even in the darkest rooms. And so the question remains, not just for him, but for all of us. When the next moment of injustice unfolds before your eyes, will you look away, or will you stand and be counted?